First up is our art segment with Philip Morris. Philip will be interviewing Elliott Masie. Mr. Masie is the CEO of the Masie Center. The Masie Center is a think tank that focuses on learning and knowledge in the workforce. Let's watch.
Welcome to Impact. I'm Philip Morris, CEO of Proctors, and your interviewer for today's art segment. Our guest is Elliott Masie of the Masie Center in Saratoga Springs, New York. Elliott, welcome.
Thank you, Philip. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm delighted to have you here. You have quite a interesting life and career and work. I was stunned to see you have spoken to 1,700,000 people. And your work is around learning and corporations and business and industry. Can you describe it a little bit?
Well, you know, my passion, and probably like yours, early on I had a passion, and my passion was how do you actually help organizations deliver great learning to people when they're actually on the job? And early on I'm also a geek, and we looked at how do you take technology that was just beginning to rise and add it to learning, and I either get credit or people, you know, boo me for helping to have popularized the term e-learning or online learning. After Al Gore gave us the internet, we helped develop, you know, online and e-learning. And I work with most of the major corporations in the world, thinking about how can somebody come to work and learn from their tablet, or have a Skype conversation with a colleague in another area, or do other ways of extending learning. So every day is a learning day, not just a work day.
So do you end up with a conference every year, which is a national conference?
Yeah, we bring people to Saratoga Springs, to our center, and each year we bring about 2,000 people to Orlando, Florida. Last year I was very privileged that my keynote speaker was President Bill Clinton, and my other speaker was John Lithgow, who talked about stories and did storytelling.
Amazing man.
A wonderful guy. I got to do an artist workshop interview with him, and we just talked about stories, and John ended up reading, or not really, from memory, sharing a story from when he grew up as a child that his dad told him, and 2,000 people were quiet for an hour following the story, in which he played 18 characters in 18 voices. And the takeaway for them, which is what a lot of our business is about, is that it's about stories. It's about telling the story. So my main job is learning and corporate education and storytelling.
So talk about what's changed in the last couple of years, even.
Well, I'll use a word that's an intriguing word, and it is open. Things are opening. Now, people often think about open source in technology, meaning it's free. And I'm not really talking about it so much in those terms, but the average person, and let's even look younger, let's look at a kid, is no longer defined just by what their teacher gives them. So a colleague and friend of mine is Sal Khan. He runs the Khan Academy. He figured out that his niece was having trouble with trigonometry. So he did a little 4-minute segment on how to do one type of trig example. And much to her mother's delight, she went from like a C to an A in that. And then she posted it on YouTube so her friends could get it. And 1,700 of her friends got that. And blah, 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 with some money from the Gates Foundation and some others, the Khan Academy is delivering to 41 million kids their own free content via the internet to help or extend what their teacher might do. And that's the shift. We're no longer viewing we just get our content from one place, but we're opening up. And technology is allowing me to learn things, to read things, but even more excitingly, to interact live or on demand. And we find that the #1 most frequently accessed thing on the internet is that people go there to learn something, whether it be about their job or assembling their bicycle, or hey, there's a good show coming to Proctors. Let me see a little clip of that show. Oh, I'd like to go to that. And that process, I think, is a fundamental shift that's afoot.
Well, I'm finding myself, I was in Montreal for a few days this week, and I had my phone nonstop, taking a picture of a building that didn't have a name on it to find out what it was, and trying to figure out what is this. And so I find myself doing that all the time too. Where do you see stuff like email? So interestingly, Volkswagen and other companies making email a focal point on containment of that interactive stuff.
Yeah, I think we're expanding in a lot of ways. I think we're wanting to have, this is interesting thing. On one level, we're wanting stuff to be very open. On the other level, I want it to be very personalized. You know, I love getting the good email, and I don't even look at the bad email. And the bad email may be fine, but it's not what I need to think about or learn today. What we are starting to see more and more is that I want to, as an individual, I want to get fed to me my own personalized view of content, interest, and information. And sometimes I want it to stretch me. Now, ironically, a lot of people say, oh, well, that's the next gen. Well, I'm proud to be 62 and in the middle of my career, and I'm doing it. My mother-in-law is 72, and she loves getting, of all things, she likes to get email about some of her friends' diseases. Because in her world, what she wants to track are those things that are important to her. And if she has a relative or friend who's suffering from a disease, she wants information about that. So we're going through this amazingly intense moment of personalization where I want my content, I want my knowledge, and what's really interesting is I want my collaboration. I want to click and I want to be able to interact or talk to the right person who helps me with something, whether it be a teacher, whether it be an arts person, whether it be somebody in the tourism area, you know, or whether it be my doctor. We're opening it up so that the ability of an individual, based on their personalization, they get what they want. And sometimes we don't want anything. We want to shut off. You know, I go to places and I turn off my phone because I don't want to be looking at it or distracted by it.
So do you imagine that the next round of interface is a bad word, would be smart enough to say, you know what, I'm open from 8 until 6. I'm closed after that, except if Elliott and my mother call, and that you can sort of program that Monday through Friday, you know.
Absolutely. I'm honored to be on a board with Eric Schmidt, who was the chairman of Google. And if you look at what's coming from Google, it will increasingly be, let me contextualize for me what I look at, what I see. So if I do a search, I want to see things around the Schenectady, Saratoga, Albany area rather than Saratoga Springs, Utah. But I also want to see things around what I'm interested in with the ability, like a switch, to go wider, to go, you know, to go narrower, or even to go off that for a period of time. So yes, I think we're going to get a more radically more personalized level of what I want. And I think in areas, and it may make some of the viewers happy and some scared, but we've been doing some experiments with some corporations. When you walk into their store, a plasma screen sees who you are, gender, age, and any other characteristics. And what you now see as advertisements are about, here comes, you know, a 60-year-old male who is white and is this tall and is wearing this kind of a shirt. And there's going to be that degree of sort of personalization that starts to occur.
Yeah, interesting. So your work is in the workplace. This is probably the first time in America's life that the workplace has 5 distinct generations of people simultaneously. I read one book that talked about traditionalists to the millennials, and that the traditionalists are still working. They're not totally taken over by the aging boomers. And what do you see in the workplace? Well, how does that blend? How does that work?
I think there are a couple things, Philip. I think one of the things that we are seeing is that we do process information differently. Now, it may not always be as siloed as that, but if you are a digital native, if all you've ever known is the world of computers, you're different than somebody that was a late arrival. I bought a Selectric typewriter recently just to show my younger staff what it used to be like typing and what the backspace key.
Oh, my son loved the first time he saw a rotary phone.
Right,
right. Just really.
Right. But the other thing that's sort of intriguing in all of this is the concept of what I need to memorize is shifting. There is this element, and there's a great professor from Columbia, Betsy Sparrow, who I had at one of my conferences, who says, increasingly when I go to learn something, I ask, is it online somewhere? And if it's online somewhere, I don't need to know it as deeply in the sense. So I kind of looked at what were some of the shows coming up on, here at Proctors, and okay, good. But I didn't try to memorize the dates because I knew I could get to that. And so we're going to get more of what we call transactive memory. The other element that has to happen is a realization that there's wisdom that we want to connect with, but that wisdom doesn't exempt you from being a learner. And we have reversal of roles. So I recently went to a fast service food store, and there was a new hire, and she was 76 years old, being trained by a 19-year-old crew chief on how to make hamburgers. And in the middle of doing, she reached into her pocket and took out her own spice to put it on. He said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I love this spice. Try it." He said, "You can't redo how hamburgers are done in this global chain." But how do we honor the experience of our elders there? And how at the same time do we engage our younger folks and do it in ways that are different? We know, for instance, that the average younger person has checked their email before they come to work. So their arrival time may be less relevant than their engagement time. We also know that a very large percentage of people now, when they're hired, aren't being given an office, work from home. And one of the intriguing areas about the Capital District is we are increasingly becoming a place people will work from rather than just work in. So in Saratoga, we have a lot of people who, they live in Saratoga by choice, but they actually may be working for Cisco in California or a group in Singapore or another group. So I think those are some of the diverse elements. And it's a combination, I think, of honoring each one, but also stretching. So I think that.
So what happens in the workplace? Do you find that in the workplace, do your clients find that there's a friction in that, or is there an or do most of them see it as opportunity?
I think it depends how smart the managers are there. I think it's for the most part opportunity, but it's also happening at a time of rapid change and a need for high agility, which means that people are going to have to be enormously agile about what does a day at work mean. What does a meeting mean? I'm on one board where the decision was made, okay, we'll send out all of the materials ahead of time. You read and watch them. You just click on what we need to talk about, and suddenly a 3-day meeting became a 1-hour meeting. And that's what's happening, because in a lot of cases, people are actually working more independently at work, connected to other people of different ages and locations, and are being asked to collaborate in ways that are quite different. So I have a person who works for me in another part of the world because at 5 o'clock when we shut down, I can send him work to do that's ready when I come back in the morning. And we are in some situations, whether you like it or not, we are working in a faster environment, and we need people to be agile in that process.
Yeah, well, just even watching the markets, it's so how gently, really over time, but how really and deeply we worry about at 7 o'clock what happened in the markets in Shanghai,
right?
And it's news,
right.
That it wasn't 20 years ago in the same way.
Right. I think another dimension of this as well is that people's consciousness about what they need to know is expanding. I think, for instance, in this region, with global foundries coming in with GE, R&D here, we need to collectively improve our mastery of foreign languages. We need to collectively better understand what is the economy of Singapore, or what's the reality of Brazil, and the like. And so I think we're seeing a need for stretching, and at the same time, sort of related to that, I think we need to, as citizens, understand science and technology in some wholly different ways, because our lives are impacted and will be impacted fairly radically, as the internet has already done, by what science and tech does.
But one of the amazing things about the impact of free trade, predicted, but maybe people often don't get, was enunciated in an article in the Times a couple of days ago. The prediction that poverty will be eliminated by 2040 at the current rate of the reduction of people starving. It was fairly remarkable, and clearly it is impacted by open markets that create opportunity for places that didn't have it before.
And what comes from that is also an equalization. And you know, my wife and I spent some time in China, and so you take a look at what happens in the marketplace as suddenly there's less difference in wage in some other areas, and there's less difference in competencies in some other areas. And so I think we are more global. I also think we are more mobile, and I don't just mean it with my my sense of my device. You know, I also think we're more mobile about experiences. So as you know, I'm investing in some Broadway shows, and what makes me excited is that Broadway shows can work on Broadway, and then it can be mobile around the country. And in fact, as you know, when we're producing things, we're producing them for mobility. So how do you create something that's mobile? How will the Capital District sometimes build things and other times be a point of entrance? And I remember when I first moved up here, the only mobility that I ever saw there was when in 1976, the bicentennial train stopped in Albany, New York. And it was a big deal to have something that came to the Capital District and then went somewhere else. But now, increasingly, we are living in an area of mobile arts. I think we're living in an area of mobile work. I think we're going to start to see even sub-factories that are in trucks that can come into an area as it's needed or as an economic opportunity. And I think we're involved in mobile education, where a student who needs to learn something can click on their plasma screen at the library, at school, or maybe at home, and travel live to somewhere and be part of it.
So, Elliott, this is an art segment.
Right.
Creativity is intertwined throughout everything you've just talked about. But talk about it. What does it take to be a creative community, a creative country? What does it take to really leverage these things?
What I love about the arts, what drew me to be different arts, arts of science. I'm on the FIRST Robotics board. The arts of watching, dancers, whether they be in a Broadway show or New York City Ballet, or the art of horses. I own some horses, and looking at that. All of those things require something that's really sort of constant. It requires passion. That we've got to view that life without passion does not create art. It requires, and I think it involves having labs where we can experiment, where we can try things. And this is really interesting because this region had a history of being places where things were invented and failed, because in fact, before that great TV show came from GE, there were some attempts that did work. So how do we fail our way to success? And then I think that the third part is the one you were mentioning before about multi-generations, is how do we have a culture of mentoring, feedback, and nurturing? And that element is what it requires. Now, what I will argue is that in some parts of the world, it thrives because they understand that that's part of their road to success, that it is their way of gaining access to the resources that they want to have to live good, healthy lives. I hope we can continue as a society here to realize that that's a culture piece. That, if I have to argue for the importance of arts, then in some ways we're already in trouble, because it is part of what we are as human beings, and it's part of what our culture is.
Elliott Masie, it's been great. You do great work. Thank you very much. Elliott Masie from the Masie Center in Saratoga Springs. I'm Philip Morris. Thank you for joining Impact. Proctors, bringing the best in arts, education, and entertainment.